Raj Kaul Podcast, and today I'm extremely privileged that I've got a very, very special guest. Some of you might not know, the younger audience, and I didn't know much, Sheila, to be fair. But I've got Sheila Chandra on the podcast, and we're on a strict schedule because she's got a medical condition, which we'll talk about. So it's going to be an hour. So I'm gonna if I skip past parts, it's a reason. That's why. But Sheila, how are you?
Yeah, fine, thanks. Happy to be here. Lovely to be invited onto your podcast.
Oh, it's fantastic. Honestly, it's such a privilege, especially when I was doing the research and just how of what you've achieved in your career. It's been fascinating, and I'm so excited. I genuinely am excited to explore your journey and your creative process. Your bio. Before we start, there's not much about your background before you joined the Monsoon, before you formed the band Monsoon. Is there anything you'd like to sort of give us a bit of a background, your childhood, your upbringing?
Well, I was born in 65, so that makes me at the starting edge of Generation X, but also the starting edge of the second generation, because there was this, your younger listeners probably won't have picked this up, but in 1962, up until 1962, citizens of the Commonwealth were free to move to Britain.
Hmm.
And that rule was being changed in 1962. So a lot of people rushed to get here who wanted to come to Britain. And there was a kind of wave of, so then there was a second generation starting to come through, starting to be born. Of course, people came, intending to have families and settle and things. South Indian, born in South London. I didn't hear that much Indian music growing up. I heard some, mostly North Indian classical, and my mum's old Hindi film 78s from the early 60s, all the ones with the classical influence.
Yes.
And I must say, North Indian classical is my relaxation music of choice.
What I find interesting about your style and music, your bio says that you're self-taught, but your style has heavy hints of Indian classical. And because I've had some training in Indian classical music, so I'm fascinated that how you picked up that style if you haven't been formally taught. Or am I wrong here? I could be corrected.
No, no, I haven't really been formally taught. I mean, of course, I've talked with very well trained classical musicians, such as Dharma Singh, Ghulam Savri, Sarwa, all the people that came to do session musicians, either Western or Eastern. At the time, you've got to remember when Monsoon was formed, I was just 16. And, I had a tremendous amount to learn about. I mean, just being in the world of work and, understanding the sort of work culture of the arts and how things worked, how the music business worked, how recording process worked, how I could become a more effective singer. So there was all that going on at the same time as, so I would just pick people's brains, whether they were East or West. But in terms of Indian music, the Monsoon was formed by Steve Coe, who had heard the early 60s classic golden Hindi film music from his neighbor. His neighbor in Enfield was playing all this stuff. It was sort of drifting out of the door.
Wow.
And he found the influence coming out in his writing and decided that really there ought to be a band to represent the songs he was writing. And so I had been on Grange Hill for a couple of years, and I was at a theatre arts school, unusually for an Asian. I was at a theatre arts school in South London, and uh, Hansa Records had a project ongoing which was trying to form what would now call an early sort of boy girl band. And I auditioned for that. My audition tape was left at Hansa Records. And so a couple of years later, Steve Coe comes along looking for the singer of this band. At this point, he's thinking, well, obviously, I'll need a sitar player and a tabla player. So I will have a racial mix of personnel, but he's thinking at this point the singer has to be Western because where am I going to find an Asian singer? And oh, I really must turn my email off. I'm sorry about that.
That's
Let me
right.
just do that. That was very rude of me. Yeah, so he knew he'd have a racial mix, but he was thinking, where would I find an Asian singer? Anyway, so he goes up to Hansa and says, I'm looking for singers. Have you got any demo tapes to play me? And there was a cardboard box, my tape was in it. So he's listening to all these singers on a cassette player, and he heard my voice and thought, that is the voice of Monsoon. So he asked the receptionist to pull up a picture. Lo and behold, I'm Asian. And I was probably the only Asian of that age, singer of that age, with TV experience in the country at that time. So that was
Wow.
1981.
So can I ask you about how you got into the theatre side of it, and because it was, as you said, it must have been quite unusual to be the only Asian at that time to be in the theatre side of it, and also I want to ask you, did your musical background come from the theatre side of it as well?
My mum and dad were both really into music, although neither of them came from like a proper musical
Yes.
lineage, Guru Shishyak type lineage or anything. Um, and I got into theatre art school basically because I was so naughty and I wouldn't study. And I had been going to a little dance school, like a little round the corner ballet school for like little five and 6 year olds, just because the National Front were very active in our area and, what we now call the BNP. And it wasn't safe to go out and play a
Right.
lot. So I wasn't getting any exercise and didn't have any appetite. So my mum sent me to this little dance school and little did she know the trouble that would start because when I didn't particularly like my teachers at primary school and I was very lazy. And she said, okay, I'm going to get you into this dance school and you can dance to your heart's content for half the day. But if you don't study and get good marks for the academic side, then you'll lose your scholarship and you won't be able to. So there was a very real reason for me to work properly. And yeah, that's how I got in.
Wow. So did you when you were training there, did you explore the singing side of it as well? Because I'm just astonished that at 16 you've come across and your voice is it's divine almost like it's so good. Honestly, I'm still like so.
I'm blushing behind my cup
I'm
here.
trying to explore that side of it. Like, where did that come from? That singing style and it was so it's so hybridly authentic. I've just made up a term randomly, but if that makes sense, it's
Well, if you listen to the early Monsoon vocals, they are pop vocals. They're just pop vocals. I don't think they're particularly technically accomplished. They're good for what they
yeah.
are. It wasn't supposed to be that kind of recording. But then I made the album with Monsoon and Phonogram who were our record label. We'd had this top 10 hit around the world. And, it was radical because, an Asian fusion track like that had not been a huge hit since the Beatles. And they had the
Hmm.
name of the Beatles and the Stones did one, I think, as well. And George Harrison, these are big names. So it was a massive, massive thing. And, Bobby Friction very kindly said in an article, The Guardian phoned him up because Cherry Red reissued a deluxe version of the Monsoon album and all
Hmm.
the extras and everything. And he said he was 7 years old watching me on Top of the Pops. And suddenly there was this vision of Asia. It was, and he suddenly didn't feel it was all kind of back in the old country and
Hmm.
irrelevant. It was kind of a revelation for him. So it really was a huge moment. And also because there was no such category as world music, so it was racked alongside pop and rock in the
Hmm.
in the stores. People were, and it was being played in all the clubs of every stamp. So people, mixed audiences were kind of clubbing to it, and that was an incredible moment, which couldn't happen in the music business the way it's structured today. So After that, phonograms said, "Okay, we've had enough." The second single didn't do as well, and the third single didn't do as well, and they was like, "Okay, right, enough with the Indian influence. We want you to strip it all back and go back to being a band, a normal band." And that was our raison d'etre, we'd formed because of that. So we said no, and they said, "We'll throw the contract at you." So then we said, "We'll disband." And that's what happened. And I thought at that point, I had this massive decision to make because, on the one hand, I had all the credit of, at that point, I think I could have rung up anybody in the music business and got
Mm,
at least a 10-minute meeting, which was incredible as a 16, 17-year-old. But at the same time, I was being told what to do. And I didn't want to be some,
mm,
sort of empty-headed artist. I wasn't, it's all right if you're happy with that, but that's not what I was going to be happy with. So I signed back to the indie pop label. We'd put an EP out to catch the effect, catch the notice of Phonogram, which had worked. So I went back to the indie pop label, which was Steve's label, which really only existed for Monsoon, and I became a solo artist. And I made 4 albums in 2 years, and it was a massive learning process. So
wow.
I listened and listened because I was in South London in Clapham Common. It was way away from any Indian community. I had not had access to, like weddings and concerts and stuff
Mhm.
really as a kid because I wasn't living close by. I didn't
Yeah.
go to Bharatanatyam lessons or whatever, or Kathak lessons. So I was just learning like a sponge. I was just listening to all the Solkutu on the Thilanas on the Bharatanatyam tapes, and I was listening to Ravi Shankar, and I was listening to Bismillah Khan, and I was listening to all the classics that I could get my hands on, and just absorbing. So it was my musical training in both senses, really, because I was also listening to lots of other interesting, useful sort of vocal technique from the West. I particularly like gospel music and soul music as well. So
Really, that's phenomenal. As I said, like I'm astonished that you haven't come from that classical because I've sort of semi trained in it lightly, and I know how difficult it is. What? Let's just go back a second. So you said you met Steve Cole in London, and he fused the band. What was your reaction when he approached you?
I think I, like a lot of second generation Indians at that time, Asians at that time, felt, well, this is really out of fashion. I mean, you think about it, 1981 is when you've got the Battle of Spandau Ballet and Duran Duran in the charts.
Yep.
You've got OMD, you've got Kraftwerk just having had their huge, done huge business in the UK. So it's a very, and synths were just becoming democratized. They were just becoming affordable technology. So everything was synths.
Hmm.
There was nothing, it was all very modern in inverted commas, in a kind of future space age. Even, like the neon fabrics came from that time. We didn't have them in the 70s, and it was all in metallic fabrics as well. So the age had that, and there were video artists like Steve Strange and Visage. So it was, I was I was thinking, this is, I'm going to be so, so uncool. Everybody's going to think I'm so uncool. But, equally, I had grown up in that thing of somebody comes to the agency and they hire you for a job like Grange Hill and you go along and you speak the script you're given. So, and I didn't have any other ins into the music business. I decided I wanted to be a singer at the age of 12 when my voice broke. And my instrument was suddenly there. You were asking about this sound. Well, it was just there. And I think the physicality of how my voice was once the hormones broke it into a woman's voice, that was there. So I thought, well, okay, I'll go and do it. I thought it was a summer job, and it wasn't.
Well, he left a legacy. Certainly left a legacy. So the single, just want to concentrate just in a second about the single. Well, not the single, the whole album, but the song "Ever So Lonely," because I was studying it slightly, and I don't know whether you're aware. It's the scale is
Jog.
in. Huh?
It's in jog.
Is it York?
Yeah.
I had it as the thought is a thought called Tori thought. I don't know whether you're familiar with it.
I could be. I mean, the scales could be similar. The thing about Ever So Lonely is it doesn't have the Jorg has the minor third going up or coming down, one or the other. I think coming down,
Yeah,
and Ever So Lonely doesn't do that. It keeps the major gar all the way up and all the
yeah.
way down.
The fifth note is missing from. I'm looking. I'm thinking Indian technical. The fifth note's not the so Sarigama bar, the bar's not in there.
It's not in Jog.
Yeah, oh, there you go. Then
No, it is in Jog, isn't it? Sarigama.
so this thought basically that I was studying Satori thought that the bar's in there, but
Mhm.
the variation of it is something called Gurjari Thori, which I wasn't familiar with
Mhm.
until I was researching this because I looked at the scale. So this is a scale because it's got the two flat notes, the two flat arrays and gars. I don't want to get too technical with stuff like this, but yeah, I found it really interesting. I just wonder whether who came up with that composition.
Well, the thing is that Steve wrote it. As I said, the writing for Monsoon was at first Steve Coe, and then Martin Smith, the bass player of the band, joined as he was a songwriter as well. The thing is that uh, version of Jogue that which isn't properly Jogue, but that I just outlined, is completely compatible with the blues. So you get all those 1 4 5
Yeah,
chords
yeah.
in the blues, and it goes very well with that. And one of the reasons is it's also very prevalent in English folk music.
Wow.
So if you listen to A Sailor's Life, which is a very famous, standard, you have jazz standards, there's a folk standard
Hmm.
called A Sailor's Life, and loads of people, very famous people, have done covers of it. And it's exactly the same. I used to weave them into each other when I was in concert. I used to do Ever So Lonely over a drone because you've heard the version with the drums and the bass and the
Yeah,
piano,
yeah,
and you've heard that
100%.
version. So I used to do. Then I was going on stage. I didn't play live for the first 10 years of my career, and then I thought, how on earth can I go on stage? Everybody expects to hear Ever So Lonely, and I don't want to bring. There's like in the old 2 inch days, you'd have 24 tracks on each 2 inch tape. Well, we had two 2 inch tapes in sync. So they're like 46 tracks going at the same time for Ever So Lonely. And I'm thinking, well, I don't really want to bring a big, I don't really want to work on all the logistics as well as learning how to
Hmm.
play live because Monsoon wasn't a live band. It was and I'd gone on as a recording artist. So then I decided to do completely solo performances with just a tape drone. So I thought, well, I have to come up with a drone and voice version of Ever So Lonely. So then that gave me ultimate freedom. I could mix anything into anything I wanted. I didn't have to wait. I didn't have to turn around and cue, an instrumentalist so they know what you're doing.
That's astonishing, but I definitely want to get to that because I've got that on my list of notes
Of course, of
because of
course.
that
I
that
am.
part.
If you'd like me to shorten my answers, I can.
No, no, no. Carry on. It's brilliant. Honestly, it's brilliant. But I'm gonna keep. You're gonna get annoyed with me because I'm gonna keep going back. I'm
No,
back
that's fine. That's
side.
fine. Yeah, keep
So
me going where you want me to go.
so basically, what was really interesting about that scale as well, the Gurjari Thori rag, which is sort of roughly loosely based on, is supposed to represent loneliness and that kind of
Oh,
vibe. Yeah, which is really interesting because your songs ever so lonely. Absolutely, that blew my mind, and I thought that was intentional.
no, no, no,
Isn't that mind blowing?
no, no, no. It's a nice accident, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very convenient, as I say. So, and also I noticed about that song. Who played the sitar on it? Was he part of the month? Because I didn't quite catch his name, the sitar on that
On
because it
on
was
the original single,
yeah the original single.
Claire Malford. He
It
was
was
brilliant.
phenomenal.
Brilliant.
It was like when I could just listen to the sitar all day. I'm not saying the whole track, but it was beautiful. It
Do you
just
know when I heard from the A&R phonogram when Ben Chapman decided to do a remix in 1991? Apparently, he just put the tapes up, sat there at Psalm, leaned back in his chair, pushed up the sitar solos in the middle of the track, and just sat there listening, just going, "What is there to do?"
wow.
They were really good. They were really, really good.
It was phenomenal. And also, I want to get into the technical side of you recording this song as well, because what was that like as a 16-year-old, or were you 15 at that time?
Oh, no, it was 16, 17, 16
Yeah.
when I was
So, what was
actually
that
recorded
experience like?
everything.
Because you're going into a live studio with these musicians and stuff. So, if you can elaborate on that, I'm
Sure.
fascinated.
Well, I'd already been in the studio to record the EP that I mentioned. We recorded on the indie pop label to get phonograms. Effectively acted like a demo
Yep.
tape, although it
Yep.
was commercially released. So I'd already been in a little 16-track studio to do that in Carnaby Street. But when we came to record, the A&R guy wasn't supposed to do this. He gave us, it was Christmas time, he gave us his entire next year's demo budget to sneak into the studio at Rockfield. And we spent all his budget on Ever So Lonely. We didn't even record a B-side. And I walked into the studio. I mean, what, as you know, what classically happens is that all the other instruments get put down,
Yeah.
and then the singer walks in at the end and puts the vocal on
Yeah.
top and plays with the feel of the instruments. Um, so I walked in the studio and heard Ever So Lonely and thought, oh my God, this is a hit, and instantly became paralyzed with fright that I couldn't possibly do a good enough vocal on it for it to be a hit. And it was that mine was the weak point, and but I got over that, and it was just fantastic to be working at that kind of quality, because when you listen to the George Harrison recordings in the 60s, the sitar is quite twangy and the tabla is quite subtle.
Hmm.
And it's in part because the recording technology wasn't up to it. You couldn't mic the buyer and get those lovely
Mm.
deep sounds. And equally with the sitar, you couldn't really hear the sympathetic strings, and all you got was the top twang, not the resonance from the lower
Gotcha.
chord
Yeah.
and all
Yeah.
that. Of course, for fast forward with this huge leap in technology by the early 80s, suddenly you did have mics and machines that could capture that. And so, I was saying to someone recently, if Ever So Lonely had been written with all the arrangement and everything in 1971, you couldn't have recorded it.
Wow.
You couldn't have recorded it in the same way. You could have recorded a very stripped down version, but you couldn't have recorded it in the same way. So in those 9 years, those sort of huge 9, 10 years, there was that huge sort of thing. So yeah, just hearing those instruments played by people who were so, so good at what they're doing, and that great arrangement, which was in part down to co-producer Hugh Jones. Um, yeah, it was mind blowing to be able to go and
What
put the vocal on the top. Amazing.
what was your practice process? Because like you've been given this track at that time, and you're 16, 17. You said, what was, how did you rehearse for that recording?
Well, I had a piano demo version to play a cassette at home and practice. But you've got to remember, I've been at stage school for 5 years at this
Yes.
point, so I
Yeah.
have the discipline to work on my own, and to get the vocal sounding as good as I can possibly make it.
It's amazing. Okay, the other thing I wanted to ask you about this song, because I'm sorry if I'm obsessed about the one song. It's there's a Hindi version, Kitne Akele. Who wrote that?
That is a translation by Manoj Bhatnagar, who worked at the Hindi section of the World Service, the BBC World Service. So we made contact with him, and he very kindly translated and was there in the studio whilst I was putting it down. My Hindi is still awful, but it's a proper translation.
I enjoyed it, to be fair.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
did listen to that version as well, so it was really good.
good, good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been listening to Bollywood and stuff all my life, so I've got, and I was so impressed with that version as well, and you've sung it uh, really well as well. Yeah. The other thing I was going to ask you now is the top of the pops moment. What was that like? Because you're in a sorry, and that's never been seen on national TV before, and you're singing, and you got this wonderful pose as well. If you can just tell me about your experience and going on top of the pops and experiencing all that.
Well, Dilip, the tabla player, he used to play for dancers at the place. And so he was really good at working out what rhythms would get people dancing. And I think that's one of the reasons why that tabla track on Eversley is so hypnotic. It's brilliant. He was going out with a choreographer called Lorenza who choreographed all that for me. And she was, absolutely brilliant. Going on top of the pops, well, the run up to that story is the record's climbing in the charts, and then I get struck down with appendicitis and can't go on top of the pops. So Legs and Co do a dance to Ever So Lonely, but they want me on the next week. So I'm on top of the pops, trying to tie my sari above my open appendix scar wound. Just literally just having been
Wow.
allowed out of bed and having missed several foreign TV appearances that week. And and then the camera people do a rehearsal, and then they let the audience in, crowd up to the stage, and then you do and it's mimed on top of the pops. But the cameras, one of them ran over a camera cable, so it took ages. And I'm just standing there like just virtually just out of my hospital bed.
Well, you must have been in pain at that time as well, just recovering. Was
It
it
was
heavy
strenuous to
painkillers?
do all that dancing with
Yeah.
a wound which hadn't healed properly yet. It was not comfortable. I wasn't in terrible pain, but it was not comfortable. So yeah, the glamour of it kind of slightly passed me by from that point of view.
But it came across as glamorous, didn't it? On when
TV
TV.
always comes across as
Yeah.
glamorous, even if you've got your outfit taped up with black tape on the back.
Yeah. So, uh, what other than that, what was the whole experience like? It must have been really daunting to go on the main music program in the UK at that time.
Well, you think Grange Hill was one of the main children's
It
programs.
was, yeah.
So, it wasn't too big a leap for me.
Okay, that's a fair comment, yeah. So, the next question was going to ask you was at that time that fame's come where you were. I know you've had the Grange Hill part as well, but this is like sort of catapulted you to another level. What was that like as a 16-year-old?
Well, I was so busy, I don't really, it was nice having the attention because I was a very shy child with a lot of extroverts at theatre arts school. So, I was shy, I was probably overlooked a bit, and it was really nice to be, respected and praised for something that I was really proud of.
Hmm.
And I was very, very conscious at the time that there was so little Indian representation. I mean, you had Na Zindagi Na Jeevan on the Sunday morning, which you're probably too young to remember, but it was a program, a BBC program geared to helping new immigrants settle into Britain.
Wow,
Yeah.
I'll have
And
to
they
look that
used to
up.
have a musical act on the end. I remember them having also on quite a lot. But there was this kind of quite early 60s mentality type program that had been going since the early 60s, since that wave of immigration. So, there was not, the mainstream media had all the serious journalists, if they ever mentioned India, It was all about how integration is a problem, the sort of problem of the Asian
Mm,
community and integration and stuff like that. It was all quite negative, and there was an unwritten rule in advertising that you couldn't put a brown or black person on a washing powder ad because people would associate their skin color with dirt. I mean, it was
wow.
so bad. There was no makeup for our skin tones unless you went to very, very specialist shops. It was so bad that when I saw, like Sophia Loren, who has an olive toned skin because she's Italian, on TV, everybody, I would kind of rush to the TV because you never even saw
Mm,
brunette women being regarded as beautiful. It was all English rose and blonde hair and blue eyes. So it was a very, very different time.
wow.
Ask your mum about Vesta curries. Those were an abomination, which fortunately has been taken from the face of the
It
earth.
just sort of makes me think that we're standing on the shoulders of giants, really, like yourself, where we are today. Because I think we're so privileged today, we don't realize sometimes. But there we go.
Well, but then I stand on the giants of all the fabulous artists that I listened to and supported
Absolutely,
me.
yeah.
So, it's just generational as it goes on.
Okay, all right. In 1983,
Oh, I didn't finish my point actually.
sorry, I
What I
beg your
was saying
pardon. So
was
rude.
I felt it was very, very important to represent the Asian community um, in a good way. And that felt like that was the thing that felt the heaviest actually for a 16-year-old girl who had never visited India, who was a Christian, who was a meat eater, who wasn't a Hindu or a Muslim, and didn't belong to one of the big ethnic groups like Punjabi or Gujarati or what
Hmm.
have you, or and live in a community centre. I felt that I really didn't know enough about it to represent Asian people well. And then I was having from the older generation were quite unsupportive. They felt that what Monsoon was doing and that sound was a bastardization of Indian culture.
Mm.
And some of them were very against it and very critical of it.
That was one of my questions, but I'll ask you that later. Yeah.
Yeah. So that I think that was the heaviest thing. But that generation, all of us had it drummed into us by our aunties. Don't you ever give them a reason to criticize us. Your behavior must be perfect.
Mm. I suppose I'll bring that conversation in now. Like you said about the opposition. I can't think of a better word right now.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, from the Indian community themselves.
Well,
Um,
from the older part,
the older
some,
part, yeah. So
yeah.
even like because I was studying your use of balls, double up balls, and it's not the conventional use of them.
No.
Was there any opposition to that because it wasn't conventional clap, but you're using a classical terminology, but in your own way, which is I love it myself. But was there opposition to that from?
I upset every tabla player I knew.
I knew it. I knew it. This is why I wanted to ask this question.
Because you see, like, okay, there's some double bowls on my early solo albums, but the real tour de force double bowl pieces are the speaking in tongues pieces, speaking in tongues 1 to 4,
Yeah, yeah.
which are across the drone and voice trilogy of albums that I made for Real World. And at that time, samplers had just come in and people were illegally sampling because it was Wild West at that time. The
Yeah.
legal industry the lawyers hadn't caught up. So people were sampling my stuff because, solo voice and drone, great, I'll have that. It's very easy to lift.
Hmm.
And people were sampling my voice and illicitly and doing all sorts of like all those sort of jerky cuts that samplers in the early days did. And I thought, okay, I'm going to play live. There was a rumor going around the music business that the reason I'd never played live before was because I couldn't sing. And of course, I'd done no gigs, played no weddings, anything that would give the lie to that. So I thought, okay, Steve suggested writing a vocal percussion piece, and I thought, okay, I'm going to write it as if it's sampled. I'm going to make it really, really choppy. and Steve's going to put loads and loads of effects on it, and people will think that I can't replicate it. And then I'll go on stage and I will start the performance with one of those.
Wow.
So that's what I used to do. So that's the reason why everything's so cut up. But also as a vocalist, I am not terribly mathematical. And I know the beauty to a drummer, the beauty of the ball is the mathematical precision and the
Mhm.
way that the cycles go away and return to the sum and all that sort
Yeah.
of stuff. I was more interested in the emotional connotation of the voice,
Hmm.
the way you could use that sound in almost collage-like form to represent dramatic emotions, shifting emotions. So I threw it by the fourth one. I was throwing in things like Finnish counting, and Old English syllables relating to mimicry of bird song, stuff like that. I was just chucking stuff in there. So, because for me, that was the more emotive thing to do.
So, the point I wanted to stress on, what was it, the reaction of the tabla players, and how did that, your,
Well, you can't do that. The phrase I used to hear, you can't do that. You can't do that.
so did you see something, did someone just come to, people come up to you, tell you, or
Yeah,
this, or,
journalists, double players will come up to me and say, you can't do that. And the
but you
answer to
were on
that,
national
I
TV
just
for it,
did. I just did.
and you were on national TV for it. So,
Well, no, I didn't. Wasn't doing it during Monsoon, and I didn't get so many TVs when I
yeah,
was
no,
doing
I'm on about your
the stuff.
later album,
Yeah,
not doing Monsoon, for
real world label.
the Zen Kiss album, wasn't it?
Yeah,
That on that one, yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I was. I was on. There's a clip on my website of me on my bio page of me on Pebble Mill at One with Alan
Yes, yes,
Titchmarsh.
that's the one, yeah.
People surprised by it.
Yes, I think when they hear the recordings, they think it might be edited together or something like that. When they actually see me on stage doing it, I think it gives them a tremendous lift that human skill and imagination are still the most important
And is
things.
it hard to do?
No, I've been practicing it. I've been absorbing it. I haven't really had a teacher. I've been absorbing it for about 11 years, and it's easy for me now. But I started off a very sort of slow speed, and I've just generally got
Built
better.
it up.
Yes.
Let's hear it. Ladies and gentlemen, Sheila Chandra.
Tadadikita tadimitikita tam. Takitikita tadimitikita tam. Tadadikita tadimitikita nagitakita dagitakita dadikita dagadaginaganagatum tam tadinkadina tagatipik kujuna tagadimita tagadimita utunga tatatatunga tatadadigita tagatum tatadadigita tagadagadagatunga tatum.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think people who, and I can't blame them, people who've spent 10 years learning all those mathematical patterns from scratch and are not allowed to pick up a drum for the first two until they've got them all in their heads.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm sure they're resentful of this woman who comes along and starts chucking all the syllables about any way she wants to.
there's there's another tabla player who's based in London. You probably know him. You might know him. Kuljit Brahma. You heard of him?
Yes, I know, Kuljit.
He had a similar probably experience to you. Probably not as extreme, but he wasn't taught tabla formally by anyone. He picked it up himself, so he was frowned upon as well because he's not
Mm.
part of any Gharana. So,
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
yeah,
Yes, we are. We're upstarts.
yeah. You're revolutionaries. That's what it is. So yeah, after that, so in 1983, the band disbanded. What was if you wouldn't mind talking about? Was it just everyone went their own ways, or how did that?
Well, no, that was the point at which Phonogram was saying, we've got
Yes,
all of you signed,
yeah,
and you have to do what we say because we're going to throw the contract and get the lawyers onto you. And you've agreed to do this number of albums. We've
yes,
been signed for 5 years, and we'd agreed to do, I think, 3 or 4 albums. And which we're happy to sign at the beginning because we thought that, they were going to be supportive. And then they said, no, take away the Indian influence. We can tell you how to sound. We've got the contract. And we said, okay, we're disbanding. Then you got no band. That's how we got out of it.
What was their reaction to that? Or they were probably not
They
happy.
signed You know, I didn't get the reaction from the big boss, but I'm sure they weren't happy about it. But there you go. That's
And then
if
after
the
that, you
band's
did
not
the 4
happy.
solo albums, didn't you?
Yes, did
With
four
Steve
solo
Cole.
albums in 2 years on Steve Coe's label, yeah.
Yeah.
And I started to write with my second solo album at 19. So Quiet was the.
So what was the process behind that? Did you just go to Steve? Who approached who? Did you go to Steve, or did Steve go to yourself? And
Well, we were all sitting around writing the press release announcing the breakup of the band, and at that point, Steve was saying, "Well, what do you want to do next? What are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, I don't want to sign to a major label where, because at that point, uh, Phonogram would probably have taken me on as a solo artist."
Mhm.
And with Ever So Lonely behind me as a hit single, I'd have had a good start to go in and be a mainstream singer.
Definitely.
If I'd been willing to drop the Indian influence. And I said, well, I really don't like being told what to do as an artist. And he said, well, you could come back to the indie pop label and make albums here, and no one could tell you what to do. So
It
that's
just
what I
makes you
did.
think of like the industry now, because we've got a massive independent scene now because of stuff like that probably now, especially with Spotify and stuff. So it just makes me think of like how much freedom we've got now. But then but then you got the challenges of getting your music noticed.
Yes.
Isn't it? It's just the other side of the coin.
Yes, exactly. Yes. That's a huge job.
Yeah. So after your albums, you said on your bio that you retired at 20. So can you tell me about that? You just decided to pack it in.
Well, you think about it. I've been working on Grange Hill from the age of 13.
Mhm.
I've been doing the stuff with Monsoon 16, 17. Then at 18, I make 4 solo albums in 2 years. Then I need a break. I'm 20. I need a break. I've been working in the adult world of work,
Non-stop.
taking in all this information and learning how to be an actress, learning how to be a singer, learning how to be a solo artist, learning about recording. And yeah, I needed a break. So I took a sabbatical for 5 years.
Wow. And what did you do?
Well, everyone said, oh, it's death. If you leave it, if you leave your career for any length of time, people forget about you.
Yeah.
And I was, I just needed a rest. So I said, well, I'm doing it anyway. And I realized that even though I'd spent the purpose of the 4 albums in 2 years was to learn. So I wasn't gigging, I wasn't releasing singles, I wasn't doing a huge amount of promo. I was going into the studio, the first album just as a singer, the second, third, and fourth as a writer as well, and learning the craft. But even then, the pressure to produce something meant that I wasn't learning the way that in the depth I wanted to. So in those 5 years, that's when I went and really looked. I mean, I had been starting to look at Indian folk. I'd been starting to do ball on my first solo album and through to the fourth. Um, I was starting to learn sargam and all that sort of stuff, but I didn't feel I really had it well enough. And so between 1985 and 1989, I literally used to sit there for like 3, 4, 5, 6 hours a day and learn songs, listen to ragas, practice vocal ornaments, pick out various ragas and improvise in them just on my own, learning. That's when I was listening to the Bharatanatyam tapes with,
Where
with
did
all
you
the
get this
Solkati.
information from? Because this is before the days of YouTube. And how did you get that information? With the books, or was it just listening, or how did you pick that information up?
Go down to the South Hall and buy shed loads of records and tapes.
Really, it's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah. That's all you could do is physical media. And
Yes.
it was pre-CD, so it was vinyl and tapes, mostly tapes.
Do you know what, Sheila? That's so inspirational to me, because I'm constantly learning and stuff. And I'm actually really inspired by that. That you've gone on by yourself. There's no help there, and you've learned something that's people take years to learn stuff like that. So I
Well,
mean,
I did take years. I mean,
no, but with a
I,
teacher,
at that point, I had learned, I had heard about the tradition where you go back 1 month of the year to study with your guru every year, no
yeah,
matter how big you get. And I thought, well, I can't do that, but I can do this on sabbatical. So that became my kind of big study
that's amazing.
time.
Wow, I'm astonished.
And the thing is, I couldn't go to a teacher, but also there wasn't a teacher who could have taught me all the vocal techniques that I needed to know. They could only have taught me one tradition. And the other thing is, I didn't want to learn too many rules because at that point, you think about it, how much Asian there were a few Indo jazz, there was Taj Mahal, there was Shakti, there was all the like George Harrison recordings and some of the Beatles. There wasn't really there was no fusion course. There was no place you could go
Mm,
to learn. And I didn't want to go and learn, in one gharana of one classical
yeah,
style,
yeah.
and then 7 years later walk out and not be able to do what I was setting out to do anyway. So
Mm.
I decided that absorption was a better
No,
thing.
it's amazing, Sheila, because I can tell you from my experiences that what I found is exactly what you're saying. Because I've studied under classical, but you don't actually learn what you really want to do. You just learn about classical theory and singing. You might learn techniques and stuff, but just the theory takes you years to learn itself. And you're thinking, gosh, I've wasted all this time. And the vocal coach I've got now, he's a ghazal singer. He's a Jagjit Singh's student,
Mm.
and he's been taught classical. He's from a heritage of classical music, but he doesn't teach me that. He teaches me how to sing and perform, which is different. Is what you're exactly what you're saying, and also I just want to talk about the lack of teachers in the UK as well. Even now, it's so hard to get. So I'm totally inspired by what you're saying. How you
Well,
did
even
this?
more so then, because now we have some respect musically back in
Yes.
India. In those days, we were regarded, they were rather toffee nosed. They were rather sort of, oh, well, silly little cultural outpost. Nothing they do is worth anything. So, having serious teachers in that environment is, if I could have got to them, by that time I was living up north and, it was going to be very hard to find a teacher, even if I wanted to. But it was psychologically at that point, I think, quite difficult. I used to have people say to me over and over, why don't you go and study with a proper guru?
Mm,
And there there has been, I don't know if there still is, but there has been this thing in the Asian community of the only way to do something is to go and learn under
yes.
somebody's name. It's all about the name brand, and
Yes.
it's not legitimate unless you're doing it under the name brand, whether it's Harvard or Oxford or engineering or whatever. I mean, some of those, yeah, you have to properly study. I don't want an engineer building a bridge who just busked it and learned it as they went along. Although I suppose the earliest engineers, that's exactly what they did. But there is a sense of it is only legitimate if you're following another pioneer rather than being a pioneer yourself. There's this
Yes.
great shyness about breaking ground yourself. The kind of person who at school cottons on to the cool thing that is not the cool girl. It's not the cool girl that discovers something and then suddenly everybody else likes it and sets a trend. It's the second girl that copies the cool girl and helps start the wave. India is almost like the attitude was almost like I'm only going to say it's cool if someone else has said it's cool first. Do you know
Mm,
what I mean?
absolutely. Yeah.
And yeah, so that did hamper me a little bit.
What I wanted to ask you, Sheila, because we haven't got much time yet. We've got just over 10 minutes, and I want to go into the Lord of the Rings stuff as well. So blown away by that. But before we get to, I want to ask you a really really important question as a South Asian artist myself. Why haven't since yourself? There's not been much South Asian artists break through to the mainstream. Can we talk about that? Why do you think that is so?
Well, for a long time, it was because of this, structural apartheid in the music business. Because Ever So Lonely, as I said to you, broke through at a time when there was no such thing as world music. The term
Mm.
world music wasn't invented until 1987. Monsoon are having their global hit in 1982. So we're racked alongside everybody else, alongside Queen and alongside, I don't know who else is bigger, Duran Duran, whatever, in the record shop. And because we were selling in chart shops, the chart was the chart was compiled by 200 chart return shops, and who they were was very secret, but they would send in a record of sales. And from that sample, the UK chart week by week was compiled. The problem was a lot of Asian artists were on Asian labels in Southall or
Hmm.
where Leicester or wherever. They weren't selling at the minimum price to be counted for the charts.
Got you.
And none of them were chart return shops either.
No.
So there was no chance because there was this two-way system running. There was no chance that Asian music was going to break through in that era. Okay, so then things get mixed up. Bhangra bands break through. World music is named. People are more interested in Asian artists. You've got Talvin Singh. You've got uh, Black Star Liner coming through for, like in the 90s. At that point, you've got people like Nitin Sawhney being signed to V2. So you have got people being sold at the right price in chart shops. But at that point, you've then got this splitting of the Western music business into world music with world
Hmm.
music press and world music charts and world music journalists and world music shows. So look, if there's two charts, if Kylie Minogue sells in one and Diana Ross and whoever sells and Ed Sheeran sell in one and I sell in another, well, even if I outsold Ed Sheeran one week, no one would ever know because it's counted towards a different chart.
Got you.
So there's been this tradition of structural apartheid in the Western music business, even when we started working with Western labels. And that I think, well, I hope is going to start breaking down because having huge sections of Glastonbury with Asian DJs and people of all stripes now going to listen to Asian music in clubs, I think it will change. It will break. You've got Charlie XCX, you've got Asians in the music business. And of course Freddie Mercury was there, stealth. No one used to refer to it, but he was Asian. And so's Cliff Richard. So we've always been there, but I think the next big breakthrough is when very Indian sounds are become mainstream and nobody in the mainstream asks Asian artists to tone it down. That will be the
Mm.
big next step.
Because that's what I love about your music. It's the scale, as we discussed earlier. It's very much. It's got really Indian sounding scale and Indian emotion. Even though you're singing, yeah, in English,
Mhm.
which I absolutely love. And I think that's what's missing because we've had like sort of Asian artists break through, but not having, as you said, an Asian sound to it, a dominant Asian sound. So, yeah, I'm going to change the subject because of time because I want to
Okay.
discuss Lord of the Rings. How did you? I have read it, but I want the audience to know how did you get onto the onto Lord of the Rings soundtrack? And it's beautiful when they find out what I'm going to put the clip on for everyone when I do the reel for it. When they find out what you've sung, so just tell me about that.
So uh, I did this trilogy on Real World, and then Real World put out a retrospective in 1999 with tracks from the trilogy called Moonsong as like a sort of introduction sampler. And one of them got into the hands of a copy got into the hands of one of the sound technicians on the film. So they were down in New Zealand filming, for years, as you know. And then the sound technician gave this CD to Howard Shaw, who was the soundtrack writer. And, Howard Shaw is, I mean, he's done so many amazing, Mrs. Doubtfire, he's done all these sort of like really, really famous
Hmm.
soundtracks. And Howard Shaw liked my voice and decided that he listened so intently to it that he decided he wanted to write a piece which would hit certain notes because he liked the timbre of my voice on those notes. So you cannot have a melody more crafted for you, kind of thing. So
Wow.
huge honor. And so New Line Cinema, who put the Lord of the Rings films out, their lawyers rang me up from New York and said, "Do you fancy singing in Elvish?" And we talked. I was very tempted to go, "Well, it's one for the money." That would not have gone down well. So yeah, we talked and they offered something, and I said, "No, it's not enough. So I'm not going to do it." So I turned them down. And then they came back and said, "No, Howard really wants you to do this vocal." And so in the meantime, I talked to a lawyer and thought, okay, well, I'll do this. And so they had recorded all the orchestral parts, and I went to where was it? Air Studios to record the vocals to The Grace of Valar, which I think is a track on the Two Towers. So it's a very long piece, but there's a sung bit at the beginning. And it was magical because at that point I'd been singing to just a drone for 10 years. And, lovely as that is, you have to do all the work. You know this if you learn singing.
Yeah.
There's the drone, and all the emotional color is down to the melody and your improvisation and your interpretation. You have to do the heavy lifting. There's no such thing as like no one's going to yell key change in the back and then the audience goes up because it's a key change and you haven't vocally really done anything. It's just the whole track is taking you up. So yeah, you have to work very hard. So then suddenly I'm singing this drone-based but orchestral piece with seas of violins coming in and sweeping under me. And, it was just, I could have sung that melody for the rest of my life. It was so great just being in a studio, hearing these fantastic orchestral parts under a melody that's written just for me. It was amazing.
I think Howard got it absolutely right on that because I watched the clip of it as well, and it's beautiful.
It's beautiful. The thing he did, which is so clever, is he'd had a lot of sopranos. He'd had Enya in. He'd had for the first film. He'd had a lot of magical floaty voices, higher female voices, which is very sort of apt for the elves and the sort of supernatural stuff, very floaty. And but this is a moment where Aragon has fallen off a cliff and into a stream and is, virtually dead. And the image of his love, Arwen, appears to him and helps him drag himself out of the water, saves his life, basically. So it's quite gritty. And he wrote this melody and put that sort of monochord, very harsh monochord and stuff into it. I never met him. I never spoke to him. All I had to do was hear the arrangement. I knew exactly how he wanted me to sing it. Not too much vibrato, little bit of grit, little bit of edge.
That's phenomenal. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was great.
Do
Great
you know
experience.
what I'm going to do? I'm going to start watching I've got the Lord of the Rings extended versions, so I'm going to watch them again. But one thing you did say in your bio that the scene was actually longer.
Yeah, the extended version has the correct cut.
Is it? Oh, I've got the extended version.
Yes,
I'm going
but
to
the
watch
theatre release version doesn't.
Yeah.
Because it was running horrendously long.
Last point before we go, Sheila, if we've got a few minutes, is you're an author now, and I'm going to buy one of your books, but I'm going to plug the book in the description as well. So hopefully, especially the artist one, I'm interested in because of the thing, unless the other one's got relevance as well. So could you just tell me about the book Organizing Your Creative Career? Because just something I struggle with as a dad of two kids, and I work full time, and I'm trying to do music as well. So something
very difficult. Yeah. Well, as you alluded to at the beginning, I have this medical problem. I have burning mouth syndrome, and I also have a scar to the front of my one of my vocal cords, which I got in an emergency operation to save my sight. And both those things caused me pain, so much pain I can't even warm up. So I had to give up singing in 2010. And I needed a new voice. And I'd been writing a diary for about 15 years at that point. So writing became my new voice. And I realized quickly that I wasn't a creative author, I was more a non-fiction author. And I had this talent for home organizing. So the first book I wrote was Banish Clutter Forever. But then I met and mentored the street artist Stick, who is, I mean, he's up there in the Banksy League. But when I met him, he was homeless and painting on the streets and hadn't really had exhibitions, solo exhibitions and things like that. So I mentored him and decided to become a coach. And he begged me to, I'd written down a whole load of tips for him and things because at that point I was finding it painful to speak and I couldn't sort of tell him. So I wrote this sort of small book for him. And he said, expand it. People need this. And so that became Organizing Your Creative Career, which goes right from organizing your studio right down to organizing who gets your copyrights when you die and everything in between, who your support team should be, how to make a start on social media, although they're obviously much more sophisticated books on social media now because it came out in 2017. So it's sort of, I felt there were books on all these subjects, but not ones that told you about the work culture if you didn't know, if you didn't have a family member or a friend who was involved. But also all the books were like very specialist books written by a lawyer about music publishing. Well, that's great, but how much do I need to know as an artist that's starting out? What I need is a compendium of this will get you started on the right road type book, and that's what Organizing Your Creative Career intends to be.
That's phenomenal, guys. If you want that book, it's going to be in the description. I'll put the Amazon link, or if any other link you've got for it.
No, Amazon is fine. Yeah.
I'll put the
Make
Amazon
sure you
link.
get the 2020 revised version because that's got an extra chapter in it.
Specifically, yeah. Last question, and I'm going to let you go. Is I ask all my guests, what is musical excellence in your words? What would you say?
What is musical excellence? Well, I could say that it's about virtuosity, and of course, there is a certain joy in a singer who can swing around notes the way a gymnast can swing around parallel bars. There is great joy in that. But I think there's something about which we hear about in the Hindu tradition of embodiment, presence, the divine. Even a single note, a single simple note can be sung with that sense of presence. And I think singing all music, really, what the audience is asking for is something transcendent, to borrow your mind, to understand your musicality, which they do in that trance of being in a live space. But also they ask for your very real and authentic, absolute presence in the present moment. They slow their minds down with you. And as I say, an unadorned note can be sung with just as much presence as the virtuoso performance.
That's phenomenal. And ladies and gentlemen, that was Sheila Chandra. Thank you so much, Sheila.
A
I'm
great
just going to keep you on for just for a minute afterwards, and I'll let you go, I promise. But I'm going to hit stop. And guys, that was Sheila Chandra. So please make sure you subscribe and follow Sheila Chandra. Can we follow you on social media, Sheila?
Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram. You can follow me on Facebook, or just go to www.sheilachandra.com and you'll get all the information you want there about my coaching. I coach online for artists specifically. The books are on there, and there's now a new download. I found an excerpt of a concert, of a track from a concert up in the attic, and I've just put it on as a freebie when you subscribe to my music mailing list as opposed to my books and coaching mailing list.
That's amazing, guys. And that was Sheila Chandra. Thank you.